Hey, Ross here. First of all, I just want to thank you, thank you for serving and helping out with our kids at HeavenEarth Church. You know, Jesus was kind of countercultural. It seems bizarre to us to think so, but children weren't valued in Jesus's context always like they are, seen as precious in our time. But Jesus made it clear that children mattered the most to him in many ways. And so that's what we're trying to embody with our Safe Church policy. So I appreciate you taking time to listen into this, to think through the policy. Again, you can check out the policy in full at heavenearthchurch.org. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can click a link there. We're asking all of our volunteers to read through the whole policy and to watch this video. But I'm just going to walk you through a few things in the policy to highlight so that we're making sure that our kids are safe. So right at the beginning of the policy, you just see that it's stated that we're committed to ensuring that all children, youth, and vulnerable adults involved in church ministries may participate in an environment of safety and security without discrimination. That's why we developed these policies. So right at the beginning, though, there are some definitions that are important for us to think about as we serve. When we talk about children in the policy, we mean any persons who are age 0 to 11. And then the youth, when that term is used in the policy, it's anyone 12 to 18, up to and including graduation from high school. And then vulnerable adults are people who are 18 and over who may require additional assistance to fully participate in any of our programs. But the big terms here that you're going to hear a lot are protected persons. So that can include children, youth, and vulnerable adults who are registered, enrolled, and attending and or participating in any programs or activities sponsored by HeavenEarth Church. And then obviously you'll hear parents and guardians. That includes custodial parents and primary guardians of protected persons. And then staff, volunteer, terms that we use a lot in here as well. But we make a distinction between a lead volunteer. A lead volunteer is somebody who's an adult, who's interested, they have capacity to serve, but they've passed a background check. They've been approved by our staff at HeavenEarth Church, and they've done some sort of training that includes this video. This video is a training video on the Safe Church policy. That is a lead volunteer. To serve as a lead volunteer, someone who is leading a program or ministry that day, you have to meet that criteria. A screen volunteer, or sometimes we call it an assistant volunteer, is somebody who's just been background checked and they're serving with or assisting a lead volunteer. Youth volunteer is somebody who is a youth, 12 to 18, and they've been trained to work with lead volunteers to serve alongside them. So those are just some things as we think, as I mentioned, some terms here. Those are important as we think through how we're going to serve together. Like you'll see in our position statement in the Safe Church policy, again, I'm just working through it really quickly. We get our approach, like our heart for this, from Jesus himself, who says, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And he talks about how if anyone puts a stumbling block before one of these little ones, this is where he gets kind of harsh. He says, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea. So you can tell, like, Jesus is really serious about welcoming children. He's really serious about keeping children safe. And the United Methodist Church as well states in one of its resolutions that the community, kind of the job of the church is to be a nurturing community where there's potential for nurturing human beings into the fullness of their humanity. So we believe that we have a responsibility to innovate, sponsor, and evaluate new forms of community that will encourage development of the fullest potential in individuals. So that's primary for us in the gospel, understanding that all persons are important because they're human beings created by God and loved through and by Jesus Christ. So there's more about kind of the focus on children in United Methodist social principles. So again, we have a big heart for this. Something about our image use policy, I'm working through section 2. It talks about how we are only going to share images and take images of protected persons with permission from their parents and guardians. So obviously, like, you can take pictures, but we don't share those pictures with anyone else, and we certainly don't share them on social media, on church social media, without permission from their parents. So as we've said, like, if you're going to be any sort of volunteer working with kids, you have to go through a background check. We use, I believe it's called Safe Hiring Solutions. So many of you are familiar with that already. You've already gone through it, but if you're a new volunteer, that you will go through that as well, and we will keep that on file with us. If you want to see more about what the background check entails, again, you can find that in the Safe Church policy. It includes stuff about driving, criminal background, stuff like that. Really, the meat of the policy, like what we practice, is in section 4, and this is where I really hope that you'll tune in and think through this with us. Right at the beginning of section 4, we talk about general safety. So one of the things somebody on staff is going to do for us regularly is they're going to do an audit, a safety audit of the places that are specifically for kids. So obviously, if kids are in the sanctuary with us, we're not going to have everything childproofed in there, because they're going to be in there with their parents. I mean, we're going to be safe in there as well. But the areas that are kids specific, like in the south side of our building, the classrooms and such, like, those are designated kid areas. And so we're going to do a safety audit to make sure they are safe. But if you see something there that we have missed, please let us know. But as a part of our registration, we want to make sure that you'll see in the general safety stuff there too, that we're going to make sure all that our kids fill out a protected person's information form that includes like allergy information, medical release, things like that. We want to have that ready and on hand when our kids are back there with us or they're participating in any programs. And also in here, you'll see more about our check-in and release procedures. Of course, you want to check with whoever you're in contact and serving, whether that's me, Emily, Ashley, about what our most up-to-date check-in and release procedures are. So just try to stay up to date on those. But here are some of the biggies that come into play when serving with kids. First is what we call the 2-person rule. So first of all, this starts with protected persons should be supervised at all times. That means that no child should ever be left unsupervised in any area or room. And when we talk about 2-person, if there's protected persons in a room, there need to be at least 2 folks, lead volunteer, screen/assistant volunteer, or staff and lead volunteer, staff, screen volunteer, at least 2 people in that room with protected persons, unless 4.3 clear view applies. So you could be a lead volunteer with, say, a group of 5 kids to have a 5-to-1 ratio, as long as you're in clear view. So the door is open or there's a window through which people can see what's going on. You need to be in clear view at all times. So a situation that came up for us recently, we realized that why that's so important. Why like a game like hide and seek is, I mean, it's an awesome game. I wish we could play it all the time, but it's hard to supervise all the kids at once. I knew some of our kids were doing hide and seek, and I didn't think about this until recently, to be honest with you. But that's a game that we really can't do, because that we can't ensure that all kids have a close eye on them at all times. Again, all of our volunteers have done that with kids. I've let kids do that, and it wasn't until recently we realized, like, man, we really do got to make sure each kid is supervised at all times, and either we're observing 2-person or clear view. If you have any questions or thoughts about that, please feel free to reach out to me or Ashley or Emily. Again, I've let kids play hide and seek, in the back. And, obviously if parents let them do that or let them do other games that violate this, if they're under their parents' care, that's kind of up to their parents. But if they're volunteer, or if they're participating in a program of HeavenEarth Church, then we, the volunteers and staff, are responsible for observing the policies or the procedures in here. Also in section 4, kind of an obvious thing here, one-on-one contact with a protected person. must be in public setting and with the knowledge of protected person's parent or guardian. We volunteers and staff, we bear the burden of responsibility of maintaining those procedures like clear view, I should say, or two-person. There's stuff in here about boundaries in terms of like communication, text message, instant messages. It's up to us to maintain the appropriate boundaries for whether it be with youth, children, and whether that involves social media, text messages. We should, always be there's a term in here like we should be behaving above reproach. So there's more in here about that. So feel free to check that out, or I encourage you to check that out, please. There's a section here about appropriate physical touch with protected persons. And this is a tough one because I'm a hugger, to be honest with you. But we need to be aware of how we're trying to teach kids the value of consent. And that's something that if we teach them, that's going to help in their whole lives. So we only want to, give a child a high five or like a fist bump, or like a hug when they're initiating that contact, right? We certainly never want to make a youth or a child feel pressured into physical touch. But even if a youth or child initiates a certain kind of physical touch, there are obviously some things that aren't appropriate, even if they're wanting to do it, like cuddling, for instance. I know you're like, well, duh. But if we don't mention it, then something that we don't mean to could happen, and we don't want that to happen. Prevention is where it's at. There's a section on online communication that I hope that you will check that out. It has more about, emails, texting, and that really doesn't obviously come into play unless we're dealing more with youth and who have phones and things like that. So especially if you ever have questions about, oh, should I do that? Should I not? Hey, it's here. Look at it. Again, it's our responsibility as staff volunteers to observe these procedures. There's stuff in here also about we never do any form of physical discipline. If you have a disruptive protected person, you can remove them from the group, but again, you're going to be in clear view. And then just, if that happens, feel free to talk to the staff about it. If you're kind of at a loss about how you should approach it, please come talk to the staff so we can go talk to the parent or guardian if need be in a way that doesn't make them feel kind of embarrassed or attacked. As any of us could be as parents, because parenting is so hard, right? Then we have some policies in here about bathroom procedures. So this one's really tough. There's some hard things to know how to approach it. But for instance, if a child is wearing a diaper or pull-up, we want to change that child in clear view of another volunteer or staff member, okay? Potty trained kids, if a child requests to use the bathroom, they need to use the bathroom that's closest to the child's room or area, and a lead volunteer or youth volunteer will escort the child to the bathroom and leave the door open. If the child asks for assistance, the volunteer can help, but they're going to leave the door open. If a child has an accident, we want to do everything we can to notify the parent or guardian, okay? Kindergarten through second grade, we can kind of escort them to the bathroom, but we want to let them do that on their own. And then third through sixth grade, you kind of go on up from there. We just want to kind of monitor them. And then there's a couple of bits of information there. There's stuff in here about transporting protected persons. Really important. If you ever get in that situation, read it here. You should never be alone in a car with a protected person. So again, think two-person, clear view. Well, you can't be in clear view if you're in a car and there's no other HEC folks around. We understand that there are extenuating circumstances. If that happens, authorize transportation before it has to happen, and only if it's been clearly communicated and approved by the parent. I had that once where I was with one of our protected persons. He didn't have a ride home, and it was me and him there, left at an event, And so I called up mom and dad, or I texted them and said, hey, are you okay if I give so-and-so a ride home? And they said, sure. So there's more stuff about safe handling and medications and things like that here. That's more if like we're at an overnight thing. We haven't had that yet. We'll cover that if we do. Lastly, this is huge. The last kind of sections in here deal with situations of suspected abuse. You're going to want to, like, if anything ever, so in our state, everyone is what's called a mandatory reporter. So if you ever suspect abuse, this sounds heavy, but it really isn't. It's up to us to like take next steps with that. So what these kind of outline here, there's some pretty obvious stuff that it's a step-by-step approach. Again, please look at this, read through it, make sure you understand it. There's a description of what is abuse, what is it not. Obviously, the first step is that we want to make sure somebody's removed from immediate danger. So if that means we need to call 911, that's what we do. And again, 3 mentions how like we have a duty to report it. Even if we're not sure, we can reach out to like the child abuse and neglect hotline at 1-800-800-5556 and just say like, hey, I'm suspecting this based on what you're reading here. And those professionals can handle it. And nothing's going to come back on you. Okay. Obviously, like if you have belief, like you think a protected person is the victim of any form of abuse or self-harm, we want to immediately notify a pastor. So in this case, Emily or me or Ashley. If the accusation is made against a pastor or a staff person, you can notify the HeavenEarth Church board. Right now, that would be Evan Fruits or Christy Stone or Maureen Hoffman-Waymeyer. And then there's steps that follow from there, but those initial ones are really important, and then we will help you get through the next ones, such as consultation, incident reporting, conferencing, things like that. But we definitely don't want to sit on something that we're suspecting or something that's been reported. There's another section that's not just about abuse, but say like we suspect that somebody has kind of missed the mark on this safe church policy. So they haven't been abusive, but they've kind of violated something that we want to keep to here. And I know we might want to say, oh, it happens, but there's a process for that as well. We're just all trying to take care of kids. We're not trying to like, make somebody feel bad, but we really got to keep this policy in line. So again, and there's appendices about, all kinds of like signs of abuse, signs of self-harm that, again, if you don't know, we go here. I've just gone through that really quickly. I just hope that we're equipping you to make sure you feel like, hey, I know how to keep protected persons safe, or I know to whom I can go if I have questions or suspicions, doubts, or whatever. Again, the goal is we want to be a safe church for protected persons and for their families. Thank you, thank you, thank you